If you have ever thought about starting your own podcast, you should check out Riverside. Riverside is an online recording studio that lets you record podcasts and video in studio quality from anywhere. And if you click on the affiliated link in the episode description and you buy a subscription, you will also be supporting the podcast. And if you're going to start your own podcast or you just want to continue to listen to great podcasts, you need headphones or speakers. If you click on the Amazon affiliated link, you can get great deals on headphones and speakers. And if you make a purchase, it will also help support the podcast. Both links will be in the episode description if you are interested. I just wanted to give a quick content warning before I start this episode. In this episode, I briefly talk about torture and suicide. I will leave timestamps in the episode description when I start talking about it. But of course, as always, if you need to skip over this episode entirely, I completely understand. Alright, now let's get into the episode. Throughout time, there has been ways of dealing with difficult women. If a woman spoke up, then someone would find a way to shut her up. There was a time when female independence was considered madness. So if a woman was a little difficult, you could have just had her declared insane. Or if you go back a little farther in history, you could have had her declared a witch. Hi, my name is Courtney Jewell, and you are listening to the 9th episode of the 2nd season of History Shelf, a podcast about history that proves that sometimes fact is even more interesting than fiction. For the 2nd season of History Shelf, I have chosen to title this season Something Wicked This Way Comes. You may know that comes from the William Shakespeare play Macbeth. I am going to be talking each week this season about someone from history that was accused of witchcraft. But as we go along, you will find that the wicked I am referring to were not the ones that were accused, but rather the accusers. You will find that those accused were not obviously actually witches, but victims of people that were out for revenge and personal gain, and those caught up in the hysteria of it all. And for this week, I am talking about Sidonia von Borcke. Sidonia was born in 1548 in Strammel, Pomerania. That place doesn't exist today. At least it doesn't exist in name. The actual place is still on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. The territory is now shared between Germany and Poland. Today, the place of Sidonia's birth is called Stratsmila, Poland. Sidonia's father was Otto von Borcke zu Strammel Ringweide. I want to apologize to all of my German and Polish listeners. I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of these names. Sidonia's mother was Anna von Schrecken, and her brother was named Ulrich, and she had a sister, but her sister's name is unknown. It could be possible that Sidonia had more siblings, but if she did, I didn't find any. Sidonia was born into a wealthy noble family. Her father died in 1551 and her mother died in 1568. Sidonia was involved in several lawsuits concerning support payments that she claimed were owed to her. The defendants in these lawsuits were her own brother and Johann Friedrich, Duke of Pomerania. One of these lawsuits was heard in the imperial court in Vienna. Sidonia's sister died in 1600, and in 1604, Sidonia moved into the Lutheran Noble Damsels Foundation in Marienfels Abbey. Since 1569, following the Protestant Reformation, the abbey was a convent for unmarried noblewomen. I wish there was more known about Sidonia, but this is what we know about her life after she moved into the abbey. After Sidonia moved into the abbey, her life was filled with conflicts and feuds. The conflicts she had were both private and legal ones. She fought with her co-residents, mostly the younger ones, and with the administrative staff at the abbey. There isn't a lot of details about these conflicts. The when and who is known about the conflicts, but unfortunately the why isn't. This is extremely frustrating because I feel that we are only scratching the surface of what is probably a very interesting story. But I'm going to tell you as much as I know about Sidonia. The convent's prioress Magdalena von Petersdorf dismissed Sidonia from her post as a sub-prioress in 1606. Sidonia then appealed her dismissal to Boguslav XIII, Duke of Pomerania. The Duke sent a commission to go investigate. The commission was headed by a man named Joachim von Wedel. But the only thing that did was start a feud between Sidonia and the commission. Joachim met with Marine Fleet Captain Johannes von Hechthausen. Joachim met with Johannes to talk about getting rid of the, quote, poisonous snake. That poisonous snake was Sidonia. The feud ended when Boguslav died in 1606. Magdalena, Joachim, and Johannes all died in 1609. So that feud was done. But that wouldn't be Sidonia's last feud. Jump ahead 2 years later, and Sidonia is in a feud with the new prioress Agnes von Kleist. Sidonia had filed complaints about Agnes. These complaints were addressed to the new Duke of Pomerania, Philip II. Again, another commission was sent to investigate. This time the commission was headed by Jost von Borcke. Jost was a relative of Sidonia's, but you couldn't say that they were close. There was a little bad blood between the two of them because Jost had been humiliated when he was involved in prior lawsuits brought by Sidonia. The commission did not help calm the waters at the abbey. Jost described the situation at the abbey as, quote, one of chaos, mistrust, name-calling, and occasional violence. Philip II died in 1618 and Duke Francis I took over. Jost remained head of the commission. In July of 1619, Sidonia found herself in yet another feud. This time, she was feuding with the sub-prioress Dorothea von Stetten. The feud reached a boiling point during a mass, and both of the women were arrested. Dorothea then accused Sidonia of witchcraft. Dorothea said that Sidonia had forced a former servant of the abbey to tell her her future. This former servant was named Vilda Albrechts. Vilda had a past. She had been known to have traveled with gypsies when she was younger, and she had had several unstable sexual relationships. And she was unmarried with an illegitimate child. While that may not be too scandalous today, it was in the 17th century. Vilda made her living by fortune-telling and by begging after she lost her position at the abbey. She lost her position after the death of Johannes von Hechthausen. Dorothea asked Anna von Appenberg to support her witchcraft accusations against Sidonia. According to the law, 2 eyewitnesses were enough to convict both Sidonia and Vilda. Anna was Dorothea's roommate, and she agreed to go along with it until she was asked to repeat her statement under oath. Both the trials of Sidonia and Vilda were held in Stettin. By this time, widespread hysteria had taken place. Sidonia was being blamed for many of the recent deaths of Pomeranian dukes. Vilda was arrested on July 28, 1619, and was charged on August 18, 1619. Vilda's trial took place first. She was charged with sorcery and having sexual relations with the devil. The Supreme Court made it legal for torture to be used as a legitimate means of interrogation on September 2, 1619. Vilda confessed, under torture, that not only was she a witch, but so was Sidonia and 2 other women on September 7th, 1619. Sidonia's trial began on October 1st, 1619, and at Sidonia's trial, Valda repeated her confession in front of Sidonia. Valda was burned at the stake on October 9th, 1619. Sidonia was imprisoned at Marienfels, and she attempted to escape, but she failed. She also tried to kill herself, but she also failed at that. On November 18th, 1619, Sidonia was transferred to a prison in Stettin. Today, Stettin is named Szczecin, Poland. Sidonia was facing 72 charges. Some of these charges were the murder of her nephew Otto von Borcke, the murder of a priest named David Ludeka, the murder of Duke Philip II of Pomerania, the murder of Magdalena von Petersdorf, the murder of a gatekeeper at Marienfels named Matthias Winterfeld, the murder of a counselor named Dr. Heinrich Swassenberg, the paralyzation of a noblewoman at Marienfels named Katharina Hanno, consultation with soothsayers, knowledge of future and distant events, sexual contact with the devil, allegedly when the devil was in the form of animals, including Sidonia's cat Chim, and magical practices like praying the Judas Psalm and crossing brooms beneath a kitchen table. A man named Elias Pauli was appointed as Sidonia's defender in January of 1620. Elias said that all the deaths were natural causes. Sidonia had made statements that incriminated her relative and other officials. They had about 50 witnesses, but they didn't have a confession. But that would soon change. On June 28, 1620, the Magdeburg court permitted Stettin court to use torture, and on July 28, 1620, Sidonia was tortured. After being tortured, Sidonia confessed to being a witch. While Sidonia was dragged to the execution site, the verdict was read. She was guilty. Her punishment would be death. At the execution site, her body was ruptured 4 times with pliers. Sidonia recanted her confession, so she was tortured again on August 16, 1620. On September 1, 1620, the final verdict had been reached. Sidonia would be beheaded and her body would be burnt. The execution took place in Stettin. Though the place of her execution is known, the date is not. Many, in Sidonia's time, believed Sidonia to be a witch, and the extinction of the Pomeranian dynasty in 1637 did not help convince people otherwise. After Sidonia's death, she became a popular figure in fiction. She was often portrayed as a femme fatale. In 1812, Christian August Vulpius included Sidonia in his book Pantheon of Famous and Noteworthy Women. Wilhelm Manholt published a Gothic romance novel in 1848 titled Sidonia von Borcke die Klosterhexter. Oscar Wilde's mother, Jane Wilde, also known as Lady Wilde, translated that novel into English in 1894. It is titled Sidonia the Sorceress. This book caused Sidonia's popularity in Great Britain to skyrocket. Several paintings were created based on the novel. The most famous paintings were Sidonia von Borcke and Clara von Borcke by Edward Burne-Jones. Other novels have been written about Sidonia. Albert Emil Brock-Bulger, Paul Hjalmar Wendt, and Theodore Fontana have all written novels about Sidonia. Although Theodore Fontana never finished his, but the fragments were published in 1966. So, the House of Pomerania went extinct, but Sidonia's memory lives on. And that was the life of Sidonia von Borcke. Thank you so much for listening to the 9th episode of the 2nd season of History Shelf. There are 15 episodes planned for this season. Next week's episode is going to be about John Middleton. I hope you come back for that. A few things before we go. If you want to follow this podcast on social media, the Twitter is @HistoryShelfPod. The Instagram is @history_shelf_pod. The Facebook page is History Shelf Podcast. And the TikTok is History Shelf. If you want to help out this podcast financially, you can do that a few ways. You can buy merch from the History Shelf merch store. I will leave a link to the merch store in the episode description. You can also become a Patreon. This podcast is always going to be free, but there are some perks that come along with becoming a Patreon. The first tier is called History Student, and that is $1 a month. And with that, I will send you out a thank you on social media. The second tier is called History Fan, and that is $3 a month. And with that, you get the first tier, plus you get to vote in a poll that helps me choose the theme for the next season of this podcast. The third tier is called History Buff, and that is $20 a month. And with that, you get the first 2 tiers, plus you will get a handwritten note of thanks mailed to you from me. And the last tier is called History Lover, and that is $40 a month. And with that, you get the first 3 tiers, plus you get to choose 1 item from the History Shelf merch store. I will leave a link to the Patreon in the episode description in case you are interested. Also, if you click on one of the 2 affiliated links in the episode description, there is one for Riverside and one for Amazon. If you buy anything from either Riverside or Amazon, that also helps support the podcast. But if you don't want any of the merch or any of the perks, and you don't want to buy anything, but you still want to help support this podcast financially, I have turned on listener support on Spotify for podcasters. But as always, the best way that you can support this podcast is to continue to listen. And there are a few other ways that you can help out this podcast for free. One is if you are listening on a platform that lets you rate the podcast 5 stars and or leave a positive review. If you do that, that would be very helpful. Also, sharing this podcast on social media and telling your friends and family that you found a podcast that you like and you think they will also enjoy would be very helpful. Alright, well, until next time, keep learning, keep loving history, and come back for next week's episode. Bye.